to that aspect, but they will just highlight what they do, their name, the organization, and what they do, and as well how we can discuss the topic. So to start the ball rolling, I'll hand over the mic to Ambassador Aljowaily, who is the director, my director, of the Citizens and Diaspora Directorate at the African Union Commission. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, my dear colleague and sister, Hazel, and very pleased to join you all in this beautiful, beautiful city of Cape Town. I come from Cairo, so I really like it when I say from Cairo to Cape Town, so I finally made it to Cape Town. But of course, my current work and my heart is with the African Union. I've just joined the African Union Commission about 2 months ago, and very happy to join the team, including with my dear colleague Hazel and the rest. And you've introduced us as we are basically the directorate at the African Union Commission that has the doors, that has the minds and the hearts open to civil society and to diaspora. So very much come and knock on your door. You'll find it open. I don't even have the lock, so you can just push it through. And that's why it's very, very enlightening to be an experience with the faith leaders from around the continent and actually from around the world. The topic of this session is on South Africa's and African Union priorities for the G20. And I couldn't tell you how proud we are as Africans that South Africa is the president of the African Union, and also how proud that we as African Union have finally joined as a full member of the group. We're only matched partly, I would say, with the with the European Union. So it's a big achievement for Africa that the African Union, as an international organization, represents the continent-wide representation in the G20. If we are, you can keep that on, please. The alignment of the priorities couldn't be even more. I mean, South Africa, as I was saying, is a crucial and important member of the African Union, and for it to be the president, then everything that probably South Africa brings in is an AU priority. But I would like to highlight a few in particular. Inclusive economic growth, industrialization, employment, and inequality. And that's part of Task Force 1 of the G20, and it resonates very much with the AU's strategic framework on key actions to achieve inclusive growth and sustainable development in Africa. So here is one task force clearly aligned with an AU priority. Food security and agriculture, another priority for the G20, and it resonates very well with the African Union's post-Malabo Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, so what we call as the CADP. Once again, a clear integration of priorities in this regard. Artificial intelligence, data governance, and innovation. Very much also aligning with the African Union's continental artificial intelligence strategy within the AI for Africa. And finally, compact with Africa. Once again, the African Union strongly supports the G20 compact with Africa. 13 African countries are already members, and we're calling on the rest to join. Cost of capital commission, very, very important, because we see that the credit ratings agencies is basically unfavoring Africa, not for good reasons, exorbitant interest rates and unfair and biased credit ratings. So once again, the work of the Commission, of the Cost of Capital Commission, will be very important to redress that injustice. Finally, the G20 review process. It is indeed an important moment whereby we can review the G20 achievements and challenges. So this is on the alignment of priorities. Let me add something that is more of relevance to this year, to 2025. The theme of the year, and I'm glad that one speaker, at least in the morning, only one mentioned it, so I'm very happy to resonate it and to echo it for the African Union, is justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations. And basically every one of those topics that we've just addressed can be looked at, can be examined, can be scrutinized from the perspective of justice and reparations for Africans and people of African descent. And I was thinking, you know, because we do have, as CIDO, the Citizen and Diaspora Directorate, we are the AU system-wide focal point on this theme of the year, which actually the good news is it will become, inshallah, the theme of the decade. Because the ministers in Malabo, when they met in Malabo last July, they endorsed a recommendation to the heads of states and government in February 2026 to make it the theme of the decade. So we have a very strong base for it to become the decade. But I was thinking, because we have different programs, we have different activities, Hazel, Angela, and I are working on, who is best equipped, who is most credible, who has the most integrity to speak about justice than people of faith, than leaders of faith. So very, very much all of you in this hall and in the plenary are just the best spokesperson of justice that we could ever find. And if the theme of the year for Africa is justice for Africans and people of African descent, people of faith and the leaders of faith have an incredibly important role, have an incredibly important potential to help Africa and people of African descent redress the injustice that has been put on them for many, many years, for many decades, even for many centuries. And here, when we speak about reparations, it's not about one aspect. It's not about the individuals, but a more just international system. And the leaders of Africa, when they met and when they assigned that theme to be the theme of the year for 2025, and you look at their decision, and please read that decision. It's decision 884 of February 2024. Very easy, 884 of February 2024. And when you look at that decision, they go as far as speaking about a more just international system, a more just global financial system, a more just global political governance. And that's why realizing justice for Africans goes way beyond Africa, goes way beyond Africans, because it speaks about a more just world. So if we put justice to Africans, it means we have a more just world, that the crimes that were committed against them will never, never, never be repeated, not only against them, but against any individual or human being in the world. And that's where the world of faith comes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Aljowaily. We'll now move on to Dr. Musimbi, who is the board chair for United World Colleges based in Kenya. Dr. Musimbi.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Actually, it's not best in Kenya. I am best in Kenya. But the United World Colleges is best all over the world. Just for introduction, is 18 schools found in many countries, and there are graduates everywhere. And our two ones that are in Africa are one in Eswatini and one in Tanzania. But today, I want to talk to you about the subject that we were given, which is interreligious action in Africa. I thought very deeply about this, that how can I be able to communicate something that you will remember? So I thought that I would use a story. First of all, I would use my personal story and a story of a community that speaks to this. One, my personal story is that I love this continent because I was educated at university with the people who were here before independence, and they told us the only way you can change Africa or be ambassadors in Africa, and I love to think I'm an ambassador, is for you to really know your continent, love it, embrace it, wear it everywhere that you go. And when people like Chinua Achebe and Ngugi wa Thiong'o and others told us that, we actually took it very seriously. And so I have worn this African continent with pride. When I went to study, it's the pride of the continent that made me say, I need to come back to the continent. And then when I had the international job, which I've had for the last 40 years, I felt like the best I could do is to be able to do that work in a global context, but tell the story of Africa wherever that I go, that I never let journalists and others take it away from my mouth by only depicting things that don't work. So let me give you an example of one thing that I feel has really shown me the possibilities of local interreligious things that can work. Several years ago, one woman theologian known among ecumenical groups as Masiama Oduyoye, she's Ghanaian by nationality, and a theologian of great, she's 90 years old now, but she's really well known both in ecumenical and interreligious spaces. She was once the deputy general secretary of the World Council of Churches. But several years back, she noticed that the voices of African women were completely not heard in theological circles, as well as in the issues that are really important to African women. And here I'm not talking about only educated. I'm talking about our aunts, our grandmothers, our villages. I'm born in a village. I know what a village looks like. And I know how important community is in those places. Weren't really being heard in forums such as this because we hadn't written our story. Our story was being told through Western writers, through our brothers, the men who were trained in theology. And what she thought we could do is we could tell our own stories, but not only the stories of those of us that are theologians, that have masters and PhDs, the stories of where we really come from. So in '89, after the two of us, she and myself, and then had invited several others on this continent, we organized and formed what is now known in this whole continent. Among theologians, they will recognize this, the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians. The interreligious aspect of it is that we said, who are the faith women on the whole continent? Where do they come from? And we found them. Muslims and Christians and Jewish and Hindus, etc. And from Cape to Cairo, we said, this is the whole continent, from Cape to Cairo. And we started to organize. When we met in Accra, there were 89 of us. We had found each other after a research of 7 years. 7 is an incredible number. Found each other. And when we found it, we said the one thing we want to change is understand the issues that impact on the lives of women on the continent. And we want to speak from our religious backgrounds to see how we can change. Why religion? Because we understand that the communities we come from, their faith matters. Women on this continent care for faith. They will fill their religious places wherever they are. And the faith and hope that faith gives us makes a difference. It makes a difference for them. Whether those women are Rastafarians or Christians or Muslims or Jewish, that which they believe in is really what gives them hope for the next day. So we said we were going to embrace our own faiths, and whether we feel comfortable or uncomfortable in it, we needed to be inside in and find the solutions within that. The difference between this and the women who are doing theology and biblical studies in the West was that they often pursued individual justice, the question of individual justice. It didn't make sense for us to pursue individual justice, especially for the fact that for we educated women, we had already got some justice of the fact that we had been enabled to have an education. But if I have an education from my family and I'm the only one, or if many girls in my community don't get an education, what justice is that to the world? So we wanted to do a communal theology, one. And we wanted the second thing, I have to remember, I have 7 minutes. So maybe I have already done 4. And we wanted also to understand that for us, it's not just that individual justice is not enough, but not also enough not to do a theology that will lead us to inclusiveness. If we are uncomfortable about the leadership of men, we want to invite them to the table to hear us, and we want to hear them. We don't want to do a separate theology. Yes. Huh? What? Yes, so I'm going to say the last thing. So since then, 1989, we have overcome the idea of the dearth of literature that is written by African women, because we have published more than 200 books and dissertations and several articles. We have been able to actually have part of what we write taught in colleges and universities, here and abroad. And the third thing that is most important for me is that we moved away, after we had done enough of the work of knowing our community, into what changes do we want to make in our communities. And so we started to work with the people in the local communities to pursue those things. During HIV/AIDS, that was our theme. We worked with our communities to understand how is this impacting the women and men and children in the villages where we come from. COVID recently, we have publications on COVID, but also work that addressed and made the world understand what African women in the faith communities were experiencing in COVID. Climate, we've written on climate. Environment, we've written on climate, but every writing has to be followed by a praxis. And I can tell you from Cape to Cairo today, our voices are present. And I go to places and find young theologians who have studied in seminaries and institutions. And I say my name and they say, I read your book, or I have read about the Circle book. This is what I think can be a praxis of us getting involved with our communities, both especially translating United Nations and these big talks to communities so that the communities understand we must domesticate the language and also bring the practical things that will change people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. It's always a pleasure to hear a woman speak within the interfaith world. I will now move on to Ambassador Michael Murphy for his presentation. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Well, she could have had 2 more minutes of my time, frankly. So I'm from one of the oldest organizations in the world that none of you have ever heard of. The Order of Malta is an order of the Catholic Church, but is also a sovereign entity under international law. So we have the same diplomatic status as the Vatican, and we have a permanent observation at the United Nations, the African Union, the European Union. But we have no citizens. We have very little territory, 4 palaces in Rome. And we consider our citizens the sick and the poor of the world. So ultimately, our mission is to deliver defense of the sick and the poor. And we do that through our own charitable works, through collaboration with other religions, with other faith-based groups. And ultimately, what I wanted to talk a little bit about today is the difference between micro and macro. Because we're a unique organization, we both have government status and humanitarian status. We can do a lot of bridging. And we do bridges between government organizations, non-government organizations, and faith-based organizations for delivery. But when I say micro versus macro, we talk a lot about very large policy things we're talking about at the African Union and things of that nature. I've found success in life and in Africa boiling it down to the micro, which is first go down to the church, then go down to the traditional leader, but ultimately end up with the woman. Because the woman in the village is really where delivery gets done, and it's where ground truth is. And for me, from a Catholic perspective, I don't ask a Monsignor in Rome how to get something done in Africa. I ask the nun in the field. And that's ultimately where I think we all can take a lesson, which is the truth is there, and we know what the religious truth is, but the truth on the ground of what's needed comes from the local. It doesn't come from the international. It doesn't come from the national. It comes from the local. And if we listen to those voices, and those voices are amplified, it actually makes consensus a lot easier. It makes consensus across religions easier. It makes consensus across governments easier. Even with the change in the United States and its policy about foreign aid, the reality of it is people still have a good and open heart. And people with a good and open heart with a clear mission can deliver. And so my only intervention here is we've delivered things across Africa and through crises, and a lot of times we're reactive as a faith-based community. We're in reactive mode. We need to take a little time and be proactive, and that proactivity can come by listening to the localized person on the ground. And I would say 9 times out of 10, that's a woman in a village. of me. She could have taken another 2 minutes, but.
Okay, thank you so much, Ambassador. Can we have a round of applause for our three speakers? We have heard from our three speakers, Ambassador Aljowaily, Dr. Musumbi, and Ambassador Murphy. So we are going to open the floor. Ambassador Aljowaily spoke about the theme of the year, which my directorate is hosting, and Dr. Murphy spoke about how they are engaging women, and Ambassador Murphy spoke about the two hats that he's wearing, the city and the humanitarian aspect. So we'll now open the floor. If you have questions for the three speakers, we will take them and they will respond to your question. Anybody? Sorry, when you take the floor, can you please state your name and who the question is going to for the speakers, please? Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. My name is Kudzanai Mutomba, and I'm from Zimbabwe, working with traditional leaders as a member of a royal family. My question is going to Madame Kinyoro. You talked about the issue of women's now gaining ground in terms of their rights and all those things. But we're still having challenges in regards to colonial legacies, especially on issues to do with women empowerment. So how best can we reduce certain issues that are coming from the developed world, coming to Africa is part of development, but in reality is something that is affecting our own faiths, our own beliefs. I can give you an example of in my country, in my community, there was the program that was introduced as a program for health, which is the program for circumcision. Everyone was supposed to get circumcision. We were promoted on TV and everywhere. But if you look at it in the West, how many countries are pushing for circumcision? You see. But in Africa here, it's like, if you're not, you're not healthy, it's something, 60%. But is it really about that? And we have many other issues. For example, the issue of LGBTIQ. These are rights. But now, just because the West is now keeping silent on them, where are those resources that were coming to push for these things? And when the communities resisted because it was against their cultures, countries even received sanctions. So, is it really about faith supporting or now becoming an arm of politics? Or is faith standing alone to defend the communities? Because every time when you see faith institutions not saying anything against those issues, but then when things are silent, they are now coming out. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. My name is Salim Charles from Nairobi, Kenya, and thank you for the panelists for the amazing presentation. So I work for an organization called Reimagining New Communities. And the essence of finding this organization is we are imagining communities where we are not just talking about the problems about our communities, but we are looking at the root causes and solutions and not symptoms. And when you talk about interreligious action, I'm imagining that we are talking about grassroots movements or grassroots action that support solutions within these communities. And so my question is, as you work across different organizations, and I like what Dr. talked about in terms of the work that she's doing with women, how then do we prioritize the needs of children in these religious spaces and take their wisdom? Because most of the time when there are crises, humanitarian, political, children are the ones who suffer a lot. Children, we have millions of children who have died. But when we are coming up with intervention, be it political or religious interventions, we never bring children on the table to discuss about these issues that we are pursuing as a continent or as the world. And that's what I want to hear more, because in our work, we work with children in primary schools and in churches in terms of finding them spaces where they can be able to participate and contribute to their own safeguarding, but also to issues of peace building and mediation processes. So I'll be glad to hear how, what you have been able to do and how we can contribute to this. Thank you.
Who are you directing your question to?
So the two of them, so Madam and His Excellency Chief Fortune, yeah.
No, Chief.
Sorry, it's Ambassador, sorry, yeah. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, there's one behind.
Greetings to the panel, really well presented. My name is Malcolm from HWPL, an international peace NGO. So I just wanted to ask, so in many African contexts, sorry, I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget, interfaith initiatives are working at grassroots. We're thriving with some of the communities level, but we face challenges when it comes to scaling up to national and AU level policy. So my question is, how can religious leaders and peace organizations such as ourselves, HWPL, better align with the African Union priorities to make this cooperation more sustainable? If I can maybe to Ambassador Aljowaily, who said his door's open, maybe align that question towards you, sir. Thank you, Ambassador.
We'll take these first three now. We'll come back, so you don't forget the question. So we have 3 questions, and each of you have 1 question. So we'll go over to you first, Doctor.
I wrote them down. For my brother at the end there first, I think we need a dialogue that is bigger than what you have presented, because it's not true that we can be able to delineate and say these things are from the West or the West is. Sometimes we do that when we don't want to address what is at our doorstep, because there are certain human behaviors that are there and are universal elsewhere. If we want to talk about issues to do with how people are treated, sexualities, etc., we can't put them by continent. So I would love to have a longer dialogue with you, and I'll make an appointment with you and see where your point is. I don't think it's easy to answer it and have that discussion here. To my brother about the children, I really like the fact that you are the ambassador here. I work with schools, and I wouldn't want a child here because I would want, for safeguarding reasons, children should not be in this meeting. And if they are, we need consent from their parents, from their schools, and from larger communities. But when we have people like you, you bring their voices and their needs, then we create a child-friendly space and make sure that the children grow with age-appropriate leadership and forums. And when we want a child to come here and address the place, we create a respectful place that respects their ideas. So be a good ambassador for children when we are with us and help create space for the children. But don't let us make the children be uncomfortable in our space where they are where we are at this moment. And then the last question, which was on, that was not for me, it was for, yes. Yes, I think those two. Thank you.
I'll answer my brother from Kenya. I would classify children in 2 categories. Orphan children are in a different category than other children in the way you approach it. So for other children, the way for me is empowerment of the mother. If you empower the mother, that allows them better education opportunities. For orphan children or children without parents, I think education is the key. And having programs such as yours that approach that and give a guided approach to a future through education is very key. And with the order specifically, so we have 2 programs, one in South Sudan. And in South Sudan, it's empowerment of single mothers. And ultimately for us, what we found is they have their own creative spirit and their own way to do it. They just needed some tools. So we have probably 150 women who we just gave them mobile ovens, and they've created an entire industry of cooking bread for themselves and then selling it. That allowed them enough income to be able to allow their children to go to school. And that two thing allowed then empowerment of the children. In Kenya, we have a good program with the John Bosco Fathers, where they're bringing orphans out of the slums and just out of prison, and creating a structured environment and teaching them life skills, not necessarily education, but life skills, things that they can do. And that gives them dignity and gives them a path and gives them structure. I think ultimately structure and back to localization is how things can be successful. But you're completely right that children have to be the focus. I mean, Whitney Houston said, children are our future, treat them well, and that's ultimately where everything is. But I do think empowerment of the mother and education is really the key to things.
Thank you very much. So, to our dear colleague Malcolm. So when I said the doors are open, not only are the doors open, but actually the meeting halls are open. And I'll tell you why. My dear colleague Hazel is working on the African Union Interfaith Dialogue Forum sometime in November of this year. So please, everyone who wants to engage with the African Union on this, speak to Hazel at the end of this session. And I'm sure, as I said, not only is our doors open at Addis Ababa, where the African Union Commission is, but our activities outside even of Addis Ababa, such as the one which will be held in November, is also open. So this is very much the address to be at and to link your priorities, or to align, to use your word, to align your priorities to EU priorities is there. But I'd like to add something. I know that everyone is very interested in work on the ground, in making an impact, direct impact. And my dear sister spoke about the work that she does, and others would speak, and how to impact directly children, women, and others. But please do not belittle the diplomatic work. Because many of us would say, those diplomats, when they meet, because this session is on the G20, right? The G20 is a diplomatic forum. So many people say, these guys, they meet, they speak, they talk, and then they... Please do not belittle this, because we need your voice. And as I think it was Lord Reverend Russell Rook, right in the morning, when he spoke about the moral duty, he didn't use the word duty. I would have really liked if he used the word duty, but the moral imperative of convincing countries, for example, to lift off the debt that Africa is paying probably much unjustly. So do not belittle how your work or the work that you would do to impact the diplomatic agenda. If every one of you just writes a sermon on some of these aspects that the African Union has produced, if every one of you gives a speech or writes an article from the faith perspective about these issues, you would never imagine how supportive that is for African negotiators when they go into their room in South Africa this year or in the United States next year. So as much as work on the ground is so important because you see the results immediately, as much as work on the words is important because they're going to have a lasting impact, and we need that as well.
Thank you. We'll go back to the floor and we'll take 3 more questions. And if we have time, then we'll do another 3 more questions.
I'm happy for the diplomatic approach as well. I think it's important. And if Ambassador Hailey and yourself, Hazel, realize in Ethiopia, we had the discussion on the 2030 and 2063 agenda. And 2030 is almost here, and it's going to pass us by. I think there were a lot of challenges, and that's one of the issues that we need to also address, is some of the challenges that we have with interreligious action in Africa. What were some of the stumbling blocks and challenges that interreligious action in Africa faced that we have now coming so close to 2030, and we're going to be approaching 2063? What are some of the challenges that the interfaith community didn't know about that we need to overcome to meet that? And I'm leaving this to you to say who can answer this question amongst the 3.
Thank you very much. I'm very inspired by all of you and just want to thank you. And just to say, my name is Yoshani. I'm a Buddhist and I work with the grassroots community, interfaith community, with my people here next to me, Nick Payton and Cecil Plaikey. So we work as a community. And I have wanted to ask two questions, just moved by what I heard today. And I'm asking you, ma'am, because you really have connected with my heart. What can I read about your work so that I can learn? Because really am wanting to learn. And I also wanted to ask you about the inner development goals. Does the AU have a position on the inner development goals? Because those were created to support the sustainable goals. So in order to cultivate our inner qualities of compassion, of trust, of patience. These have been developed internationally so that we can work from within, very much on really on a faith basis. These human qualities that we can then bring to the outer goals. And I wanted to know, does the AU, and Tahirih, I was also going to put it to you, does the AU have a position on that? Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Shimiko Du. I belong to the Anti-Regulation of Religion Summit. We are a religious rights advocacy movement. We saw a phenomenon in South Africa that pre-1994, the religious movement was into a lot of advocacy in terms of human rights, political change, you know. But since 1994, a realistic view of South Africa will suggest that every religious action is just reduced to mere charity work. You know, I'm a Christian, so you could say the church has moved from its prophetic, you know, thrust or input into just mere charity work. Is this general on the continent? Because every time I was attracted to the topic, okay, because I thought I would hear a lot of advocacy, maybe the suppression of that voice. But in your opinion, around the continent, is there a lot of advocacy happening? Are we still that voice that speaks into the conscience of politicians or politics? Africa is sitting with serious problems. Militancy, sex trade, human trafficking, those are serious issues. Have we watered that down in favor of just charitable initiatives? Is there any advocacy in that regard, considering the challenges the continent has?
Okay, I think the questions are for both Dr. Musumbi and Ambassador Aljowaily, so you'll go first.
I would like to respond to the last question, and because the other one I think is directly for the African Union, and the lady was asking also African Union, yes, was also asking the African Union what she could read. Generically, I want to say to the brother who asked about whether the church is still prophetic. I think I find it difficult to answer that question as yes or no, because there are many places where I see that people of faith are really taking some action on things, either by voicing them out or standing in front. I've seen it in my own country. I come from Kenya at the moment. There are a lot of possibilities where some of the churches have spoken up, backing up things that they think should not be happening, understanding what our young people are advocating for. But there are also others where it's silence. This I have found globally. So I think I would say that the story of remnant voices, small voices, we have to keep it. We have to keep hope alive. And I was told by an indigenous woman in Peru just last week, she said that you never lose hope. Hope only gets lost when you're dead. So, so I think that the church is alive, and there will always be prophetic voices. Prophetic voices don't always mean the people that are leading at the area of ministerial, if you're Christian, or it can mean the child in the group. It can mean a poor man. It can mean a person with a handicapping condition. And when people of God speak up, we should affirm them as church when you're talking about the church. Because I think part of the theological problem has been that we have defined church as a hierarchy of people. But a church is the masses of people. And so I believe that there's still a prophetic voice, and we are called to continue strengthening it. That's how I would answer it. And I would answer it because when we all say things like, well, let's hear the women, let's hear the local communities. And finally, I wanted to make a little bit of a correction because I saw we were not communicating in regards to when we emphasize beginning from the ground as local actions, it's not a license to neglect or disrespect or not affirm also that you need both. You need pressure from up and down. And there's a responsibility of leaders. There's a responsibility of international organizations. There's OAU is our organization. Part of what I think we should be doing as churches is actually making it easy for people to understand. I don't hear enough people speak about what is in 2063 of the OAU. But when I look into there, I see things that the churches should take. And it's not just what came out of the UN Global the development goals. It's also what our own continental organization has in place for us. So my answer to those is that we need to do both, recognize people both, and recognize that things like ambassadorial, there's a title that is given through task, but there's the ambassadorial task that every human being, wherever you are placed, you have to take it and let it oscillate in whatever that you do. That's how I would answer that.
Thank you very much. So I think there were two particular questions that are directed to us, and one of them is the Agenda 2030, which is becoming quite close, as we were saying. And there is a real challenge here, and I think also there's a big role for the interfaith community, for interfaith activities, and for faith leaders. Now the African group is part and parcel of the United Nations, for sure. So we belong to the 2030 as much as anyone else does. We are facing challenges now to the extent that any reference to the SDGs, just a reference, is actually being called to vote. And, even away from a diplomatic pact, from a religious perspective, from if I promise something, even if I didn't sign to it, I'm just bound to implement it. So if the SDGs were agreed upon by all the members of the United Nations, there should not be a re-signing on its implementation or the reference to it. But as my dear sister has said, we also have within the African Union a framework, a development framework that not only are we very proud of, but we're very committed to, which is Agenda 2063. And here, pleased to share with you that Agenda 2063 actually is much more ambitious than the SDGs 2030, because it is also linked to flagship projects. It's not only ideals and goals and targets, but it's also projects to achieve these. And it has been, its implementation has been phased out on 5 what we call 10-year implementation plans. The second 10-year implementation plan started last year, and its title, its motto, its driving force is acceleration. So please also engage with this as faith leaders. sometimes we diplomats, we almost, I don't want to say, we consume so much of our time agreeing on something, but then we maybe do not communicate it as much to the public. Well, the documents are on the website. If you just type in Agenda 2063, African Union, and you will see it there. If any religious religious leader takes the sermon and speaks about this is really a huge contribution, because you bring it closer to the people, you bring it closer to their minds. But I'm also happy to share here that starting 3 or 4 years ago, and in my previous post at the African Union, we are making the linkage between Agenda 2063 and Agenda 2030 through regular consultations and meetings with between the secretariats of the two organizations. But once again, the word and the wisdom of leaders of faith and leaders and religious leaders would really not only raise the awareness, but will also upgrade the duty and the driving force for the implementation of such frameworks. Thank you.
I heard you mention my name, Jenny, so I just want to respond. I am not aware of a formal declaration, so I'm speaking from a position of ignorance. If it did occur, I wasn't told. I don't know. But perhaps one way to look at what you were referring to is to really say that all these goals, by whatever name we call them, whatever the acronym, what are we really doing with that process? What is that about? Why do we have these goals? What's its ultimate purpose? What do we want to see 3 decades from now? We want to see all girl children across the world receiving universal education. We want all human rights afforded to every person on the planet to be a lived experience. That hopefully we don't have conferences like the ones we are having now. This shouldn't be the topics we are discussing 30 years from now. So I think some of what you mentioned is implicit, that when we are dealing with the education goals, we would be dealing about educating our souls. And that education would be teaching us how to be lovers of humanity, how to see the divine in each person. And maybe I had a small taste of what you're talking about. Last year, I attended an event on the Golden Rule, and the AU was quite involved in it. And I think for one moment in time, I actually felt what you were referring to, Jenny. So that's my only response at this time. I wish I could say more about it, but that's just how it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador Musi, you want to take the floor?
Thank you so much. My name is Muse Hailu. I have a privilege of being a regional director of United Religions Initiative for Africa and representing URI and interfaith communities to the African Union and United Nations. As someone who was a founding member in 2010 for the African Union Interfaith Dialogue Forum, I just would like to add to the excellent presentation highlighted and also included United World College, where I serve as a president for the National Committee in Ethiopia. We have so many things to talk on that. In fact, we need to give due credit to the African Union. The fact that, as you know, religion being the oldest institution next to family, without active involvement of faith communities, we can't achieve the aspiration of the African Union, which is to see united peaceful and prosperous Africa. For that to happen, faith communities need to work together in partnership with member states. It's with this in mind. The only intergovernmental institution that established the Africa Union Interfaith Dialogue Forum. It was actually established by the religious leaders for faith communities to enhance practical working partnership on the issue of peace, compassion, peaceful coexistence, addressing the issue of climate change, and to promote the teaching of the Golden Rule, which says treat others the way you want to be treated. And above anything, develop right human relationship, which is very critical point that we need to address. And also, not only after incident took place, life lost, property being damaged, where we send a peacekeeping mission, faith communities can play a critical role in prevention. So it's with this in mind, in 2010, we established the Africa Union Interfaith Dialogue Forum. We have a steering committee. We have actually our dear sister, Dr. Tara, and many others who serve on the steering committee, and our dear sister also, Hazel. Now, the part of the challenge, as you may know, we have what we call it Interreligious Council in our respective countries, in many African countries. In about 35, 36 African countries, we have Interreligious Council, which is a very good initiative. In some countries, they are very dynamic, with well-structured, actively working, because as you know, in a place where we don't have even government structures, church, synagogue, temple, mosque, different place of worship are there. And they are playing a critical role, be it on development, be it on enhancing peaceful coexistence, mediation, reconciliation, and healing. Here I can mention Desmond Tutu, who play a critical role. So how can we galvanize this effort? And that's where we are focusing now, interreligious action in Africa. The problem is, whenever we think of interreligious dialogue, we always refer only from the Abrahamic faith tradition, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And that's some of the challenge we saw when we established the AU Interfaith Dialogue Forum. We don't have the diverse group being involved. Usually we talk in terms of relationship between Muslim and Christian. But we need to diversify. That's why freedom of religion or belief is also very important. And today, at the opening, we saw the opening prayer from the different faith community, the spiritual groups, the indigenous people. Again, the traditional leaders play a critical role as the custodian of culture and moral as well. So we need really to create a safe space for interfaith engagement. But the challenge is the fear of the unknown. When you don't know, and then, the challenge which we have seen, people get a bit afraid if we have this interfaith forum. Some would like to use it for proselytizing, and some are also afraid that they may change their faith tradition. So there should be a core code of conduct and principle. While deeply rooted in our own faith tradition, we have to respect and recognize others. That's why even the theme, Ubuntu in Action, to me is walking the talk, the spirit of the Golden Rule, where our sister was mentioning the issue of compassion. So we are actually discussing now to introduce peace education in the school curriculum through member states, starting from kindergarten. Moral and spiritual dimension to bring the work of intergovernmental bodies. More than ever now, religious diplomacy become now vocabulary within the UN and many other organizations. So we need really to enhance the interfaith council in different respective countries to diversify and to welcome the different faith tradition, including spiritual groups, to be part of it. Because we are not talking about doctrine and dogma, but working together on common issues, be it environment preservation, development, human dignity. So, we have by far so many things in common that bring us together than what divide us. And faith communities are the one who can really highlight. That's why, again, from the Golden Rule, we proclaim April 5th the Golden Rule Day. What started now in Ethiopia with the religious leaders It become like every year on April 5th, 120 countries join in proclaiming the Golden Rule Day. This is a good example. Faith communities, especially sharing from the universal principle of the Golden Rule from different holy books, including secular philosophy. We say treat others the way you want to be treated, as a cornerstone of ethical foundation where we can enhance further our relationship. So, and then we need also to bring interfaith discussion in the school, especially universities. I know United World College play a critical role in creating a safe space and global citizenship spirit in that sense. So we need really to foster more working partnership. And I would like once again to thank the African Union for setting up the AU Interfaith Dialogue Forum and a number of interreligious council, but we need to diversify and make sure freedom of religion will be also included in that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Musi. We are running out of time, and we'll now try to bring this session to a close. But before we close, I could ask the panelists, the speakers, 1 minute each for their closing points that we can take away back to our respective organization and community. So, Doctor, 1 minute, please.
I would like to use my 1 minute to say that since I have seen worked both by UN and multilateral organization and have relationships with people with the Africa Union, I think what I see that is missing is very often faith communities are brought in to do the healing or as distributors of information that has already been worked. So in similar ways that we say we want people to be involved, I think even when you are discussing hard economic issues, the faith people should be at the table during the baking itself, not at the end so as to distribute the cakes that have been baked. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and maybe I'll use the minute to address one or first of all, thank you, Ambassador Musi, for your valuable intervention, and maybe I'll use it to address that and an earlier one regarding the inner development goals, which I have not addressed, but thank you for raising that. You see, we at the African Union, we are an intergovernmental organization. So basically, we implement what the mandate of the member states decide for us. So if you bring in concepts like this, feel free to bring them to your own government, and then the governments will bring it to the AU platform. Once it is produced by the AU intergovernmental machinery, we as Secretariat will abide by it. And I think Ambassador Musi mentioned the efforts to bring in education of peace into that. So my final word is, you have a voice, and you have many channels to actually use that voice for, including on your own government as a member state to the African Union. So your voice matters, and we look forward to hearing it in different channels.
I'm going to echo the ambassador's empowerment talk, which is, as interfaith organizations, we need to lobby the individual countries in Africa. There's some times when you're 55, and there's some times when you need to be one. And I'll give you a couple examples. We deliver healthcare across the continent, but we have to register doctors in every place. It's very limiting to do that. But that's something where the African Union could take a leadership and create an organized database where doctors could be registered across the continent. It's the same with, and these are things that don't seem religious, but they're important to faith-based organizations. A civil air compact where you could overfly all over Africa. These are things where we need to lobby as faith-based leaders, our national governments, to then lobby the AU and empower the AU to then create those type of things. So my final thing is there's sometimes when we need to be 55, and there's sometimes we need to be one. And when the AU speaks as one at the G20, it's much more powerful than when the G20 separates it into 55 different places.
So our time is up, and I thank each one of you for choosing to join us in this session. I think we've learned a lot. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank Hazel for taking the time to really think about what it is you want to say in this space. And I believe we leaving here with some food for thought. We have a sense of what's happening. We have some open doors. We have some work happening in other spaces across the continent. We see some very significant strides being made for women. We have the concerns for children, and we've got goals before us. And I think in the session, if anything, perhaps we can, through our faith communities and the various structures that we are engaged in, particularly in Africa, mobilize our resources, reach out to each other, utilize what we have better for the betterment of our continent, for the betterment of the world. And I leave you certainly with a prayer that we collectively remain focused on these goals so that these prayers can be answered. We may not be here physically in 2063, but I'm sure we join with one another spiritually in owning those victories. So on that positive note, I thank each one, Ambassador.
No, I just want to share one important information and a good example. G20 Interfaith Forum, in partnership with United Religion Initiative Africa, the Interreligious Council of Ethiopia, AU CIDO, and AU ECOSOC, actually lobby and organize for the last 3 years at the African Union in Addis Ababa to make African Union a member of G20. This is a good example, the power of faith communities. This is one. Two, on the issue of Agenda 2063, I remember way back, our head of state, after they came to agreement, they didn't want to implement it. They organized a number of consultative meetings. And for interfaith communities in Nairobi, we organized a consultative meeting. I totally agree with my dear sister. How we can use in a very simplified language, ordinary people can understand the impact of this agenda will bring in the life of ordinary people. With that in mind, a consultative meeting was organized for the people, by the people, from different faith traditions in Africa, in Nairobi. So we gave also a recommendation to the African Union. Actually, that's what led the establishment of the steering committee also, to make it more practical. So all the effort is not in vain. Things are happening. And now we are even more working together and establishing this kind of network to advance further in creating a better future for this generation and generation yet to come. Thank you.
Can we have a round of applause for our panelists? Please, a round of applause. And a round of applause for ourselves. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.